ultimately the cause of justice must rank higher than the interests of a particular client in court. And more so when you appear for the government, because the government in that sense represents the public interest.
Welcome to the podcast series of the Bombay Bar Association. I am Chetan Kapadia, and it is my privilege to introduce two towering figures of our profession. Today, we have with us Mr. Rafique Dada, senior advocate and former president of the Bombay Bar Association, in conversation with Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, the 50th Chief Justice of India. Dr. Chandrachud is a scholar, a jurist, a gentleman, and a charmer off and on the bench, a constitutional expert, upholder of liberty, and a man of empathy and erudition.
I believe you initially studied in Mumbai before you went to Delhi. What were your early days like?
Rafique Sahib, I began my schooling in Mumbai. I went to school here. I was a student at Cathedral and John Connon School. And when my parents moved to Delhi, I went to school in Delhi and then to university, St. Stephen's College, for a course in economics and mathematics for the BA Honours. And then I followed it up with an LLB at the Campus Law Centre. So it was very different, being in Mumbai and being in Delhi at that time. Of course, differences in language. The default language in school in Mumbai was English. The default language in school in Delhi was Hindi. So I developed a love for Hindi after I went to Delhi, which has stood me in good stead. And now it's really a language of my heart, apart from my own mother tongue, Marathi and English. In fact, starting law was a bit of an accident because I topped Delhi University and we had some amazing batchmates with us.
Yes.
When I was doing my law, when I was doing my BA in economics. And I thought that I'm going to pursue a master's in economics at the Delhi School of Economics after I had stood first in Delhi University. But then the Delhi Law Faculty was going to commence, the term a little earlier. And once I took admission for the LLB program, the degree course at Campus Law Centre, there was no going back. We had some amazing teachers, at the Delhi University. We had teachers, who were truly iconic. We had teachers like Mulchand Sharma, who taught us contract law. We had Lotika Sarkar, who taught us criminology and gender. And we had Dr. B. Shivramaya, who taught us law and poverty. In fact, I must tell you this, that my first book, Why the Constitution Matters, has just been released for, should I say, public consumption. And the royalty from my part of the proceeds of the book will go to the Campus Law Centre to be used on request in the memory of these three great teachers who taught us. So Delhi University in that sense exposed us not just to the law which we learnt, which was amazing in a sense, but it also exposed us to different ideas, the proliferation of a free exchange of views, particularly as students at the Law College, the Campus Law Centre. So all in all, it was a wonderful time of learning and relearning.
You initially started your practice in Delhi and then you decided to shift to Mumbai. What was the reason which impelled you to do that?
Rafique Sahib, I began practicing in Delhi. Those 2 years were great because, though I was at the bottom of the ladder, I had just returned from Harvard Law School with an LLM and a doctorate in juridical sciences, the SJD. But soon enough, I realized that even if you have a doctorate in law, you still are at the bottom of the ladder.
We've all been through that.
And, I had an opportunity to deal, to appear with both Mr. Mariyam and Mr. Sorabji in those days. Soli was briefed in this very interesting case on the repromulgation of ordinances. There was this professor of economics who was researching into land tenures in Bihar at the Gokhale Institute of Economics and Politics. Dr. Wadhwa, DC Wadhwa. And, when he was researching into land tenures, he realized that there were ordinances which were re-promulgated in the state of Bihar for years on end without being placed before the state legislature for being converted into an act. And he said, surely this is something which is wrong. He was not a lawyer, but he started, researching into the area. And that culminated into a book. The book became the subject matter of a petition under Article 32 of the Constitution. And Soli was leading the arguments. And he called me out into the corridor and said, well, I'm doing this pro bono and like you to appear with me as my junior. Likewise, I had an opportunity of appearing with Mr. Nariman, Fali Nariman, in a number of cases. And, commercial cases, constitutional cases. I'd like to mention just one of them, the prosecution against several chief ministers, if I'm not mistaken, 3 chief ministers. Among them was Nandini Satpathy, who was then the chief minister of Orissa, was sought to be withdrawn. And the withdrawal of the prosecution was sought to be challenged. And then that matter was referred to a constitution bench. When Fali opened the arguments, he was not basically a criminal lawyer, but he was arguing this combination of criminal and constitutional law. But his opening address to the Constitution bench, presided over by Chief Justice P.N. Bhagwati, was among the most brilliant arguments I've ever seen in my life, either as a lawyer or as a judge. So that was a tremendous time of learning the law and seeing at close quarters how lawyers sort of unfold their vision of a case. I remember while briefing Mr. Nariman in that case, the judges were confabulating. They were having a discussion with each other. And I thought that I will use the time when the judges were discussing to tell Mr. Nariman which were the next 3 cases that we were going to cite. So he sort of very quietly put his hand out. He was pretty patient with me. And he said, listen, quiet. When the judges are talking to each other, just watch them, he said. I'm not sure he could lip read what the judges were saying. But what he was trying to tell me, you'll at least understand what the judges are, confabulating perhaps about the general drift of what's happening, their mannerisms, the way they are approaching each other. So apart from just the substantive law, the courtcraft is something which was fascinating to learn from Fali Nariman. He was absolutely a master of courtcraft. Soli was very brief. He made these small little notes at the back of the brief. And Soli's chamber had a galaxy of very talented people working for him in those days. But all in all, it was a wonderful time of learning the law at literally the feet of these great masters of the legal profession.
Because you were also one of the most outstanding juniors in Bombay when you started.
Thank you for the compliment, but I must confess, completely briefless junior in my when I began my practice in Mumbai. I shifted from Delhi to Mumbai, Rafique Sahib, because I realized very soon enough in the Supreme Court that though the cases which I was briefed to appear were many of them of very seminal importance from the perspective of the development of the law, ultimately the arguments were being made by the top seniors of the time. And that was a flip side, because the cases where I was appearing in the Supreme Court were not cases of the nature where a junior would be briefed to appear. Of course, over a period of time, I was getting my own appearances. A lot of lawyers from Mumbai, from Pune, from different parts of Maharashtra were sending me work, whether it was criminal work, it was civil or commercial work. But I realized, and this was something which was given to me by way of an advice by Mr. V.M. Tarkunde, a very distinguished judge of the Bombay High Court, who was one of the founders of the People Union for Civil Liberties. And Tarkunde actually was my father's colleague in the Bombay High Court when they were judges. And he and his wife virtually treated me like their own child. And one evening when we were researching together on a case which was since reported as Sodan Singh versus New Delhi Municipal Committee. It was on the hawkers of Delhi. And Tarkunde told me that, look, at your stage, you should be concentrating on good turnover of work. That's where you learn the craft of lawyering. And he advised me, and so did my father, to consider going back to Mumbai. Just about that time, I met Jangu Gagrat, who had come to Delhi for a case in the Supreme Court. So I asked him, well, what do you think about the pros and cons of settling down in Delhi and going to Mumbai? Because I've been advised to go back to Mumbai and practice. So he looked at me, with a twinkle in the eye and said, if you want to learn the law, come to Mumbai. If you want to earn money, stay in Delhi. Now, that's not exactly, I feel, a very correct exposition. It perhaps reflected the Mumbai lawyers' approach to practice in the Supreme Court. But that led me, and just that day, as it so happened, Mr. Temtan Nandyarujana was appearing in the Supreme Court. So Jangu said, hey, listen, Temtan is in town today. Why don't you just walk up to him and tell him that you'd like to join his chamber? So I caught up with Mr. Nandyarujana and he said, sure, please come and join me in my chambers. So the first day that I went to his chamber was truly a learning experience. I walked onto his chamber. Temtan used to come to the chambers, carry his own green canvas bag from his Fiat into the chamber. And I said, good morning, sir. So Temtan looks at me and says, there are no sirs in chambers. I'm Temtan. It was a little difficult to call your senior by his first name. But once you made that adjustment, you realized something which is at the core of, the work of chambers, particularly on the original side in those days, which was the sense of equality. Now, in a sense, there was no equality because, the people we were working with, my own senior was such a distinguished lawyer in the Bombay High Court. But there was this feeling of intense camaraderie. Of course, for some reason, I never called you by your first name. I always called you Rafique Saheb, which is stuck all these years since I first met you in 1986 or 87. It's 38 years now. So it was a wonderful time of camaraderie at the Bombay Bar.
So it is a great tradition. Then what about your experiences as the ASG? You took office around 1998.
In fact, Rafique Saheb, I succeeded you as the Additional Solicitor General of
That's
India.
where they started the whole ASG in the Western region.
Yes.
So what was your experience like as an ASG, doing government work and, facing flak for matters?
Being an ASG, like being the Advocate General, the Additional Solicitor General as well, is not an easy job in the sense that you have to really defend the government. But one thing which I think all of us learned from our peers, our seniors who were appearing for the government, is not to try and defend the indefensible. I think we learned that from you.
Thank you very much.
I learned that from the very distinguished people who were appearing for the government for the state as well, which was the ability to place a case for the state in a fair manner. Because I don't think either you as the ASG or me as the ASG that we felt that we were the mouthpiece of the union government. Of course, we had to defend a case which was entrusted to us, a brief which was entrusted to us by the union government to argue. But having said that, the point is that, all these constitutional offices, the ASG is incidentally not a constitutional office, the AG is, the solicitor is, the attorney general is. But be that as it may, the fact that, there's an enormous sense of duty which is cast from someone who appears for the government. You have to defend your client, but you have a private citizen or a private corporate entity, as the case may be, on the other side. And they are there in court to espouse their rights. And it's important to understand the function of the law officer for the union government in arriving at just outcomes. Because these just outcomes which are arrived at in a court give rise to a sense of credibility and legitimacy of the Indian judiciary. Sometimes, people believe that, you can cut corners, be a little liberal with the truth when you make an argument, and perhaps succeed in a given case. But I never thought of it in that way because ultimately the cause of justice must rank higher than the interests of a particular client in court. And more so when you appear for the government, because the government in that sense represents the public interest.
Yes.
And this is something, which our predecessors instilled on us, the importance of being fair to the court. And of course, we had great judges. If you were found out, that was the end of your argument, and you'd, leave such a bad impression with the court that here's a young lawyer who is never fair to either the other side. And, interestingly, Rafique Sahib, your opponents in a case always know the reputation of the person who's appearing on the other side, whether that opponent is trustworthy, and that reputation builds up over a period of time. A fair opponent, we'll be, of course, talking about my work as a judge, but even in a judicial career, that there are lawyers who would never mess around with the truth with you. So, there were lawyers who would give you a statement of fact, and you would just take that statement of fact and be sure that there's going to be no misstatement in that statement of fact. On the other hand, if you find out that someone has tried to mislead you, it leaves a very bad impression in the mind, isn't it?
And what about your decision to go on the bench, which you took, I think, a couple of years after you became the ASG?
Yes, Rafique Sahib.
And what was the reason which impelled you to do this contribution to society?
So one fine evening, I got a message that the Chief Justice has requested me to come and see him in his chamber. And I was actually on my way to the airport because I was appearing for the Bombay High Court in a case before the Supreme Court.
Yes.
We were in appeal. So I get this call, and my office clerk says that, he's on his way to the airport. So I went and met Chief Justice M.B. Shah the next day. So he says, in his very inimitable style, he says, I want you to join the bench. And I think Justice Variava was sitting with him in the chamber, and Justice Ashok Agarwal was sitting with him in his chamber. So I looked at him and said, can I have a few days to just consult with family? So he said, what are you going to consult family about? You have to say yes, here and now. So I said, I have to also work out finances. So he says, well, all of you here in Mumbai mint money. And I said, no, sir, Chief Justice, you don't seem to have the correct impression here. We mark our fees in GMs, which is the gold mohurs.
Yes.
But 15 rupees to 1 GM. But I said, our fees are never paid in GMs. So we are very reasonable, particularly as young lawyers. Before I was, of course, called upon to become a judge, I was designated as senior counsel. In 1998, soon before, actually a little before I became ASG. So I went back to Chief Justice M.B. Shah, and in those days, a call for judgeship was a matter of honor. Saying no to judgeship was really a rarity, and I consulted a lot of senior members of the bar, including very eminent lawyers on the appellate side. I consulted, for instance, among others, Mr. V.R. Manohar used to come from Nagpur, and he had a flourishing practice. And he said, look, you shouldn't be thinking twice, because the ability to contribute to society is what marks out judgeship. And actually, for me, that was really the key to becoming a judge. The ability to write, the ability to speak for the future, the ability to envision an outcome which would contribute to a just and humane society. And we had some great judges in the Bombay High Court, who we learnt, and we sort of would sit in their court and observe them. Justice M.L. Painse was one of them. Truly amazing, one of my favorite judges.
Mine too.
He would teach you in the course of an argument how to draft minutes of the order.
Yes, sir.
He was so precise.
Superb.
And he would be ready with all the briefs. We had Justice Sujata Manohar. I was
very kind.
Exceptionally fond of Justice Sujata Manohar, because she really encouraged juniors. Chief Justice P.D. Desai was very tough on juniors.
Yes.
But though he was tough, he was even-handed.
Yes.
And his toughness was because of his innate sense of equity.
Yes.
And he wanted a just outcome in a case. early morning, he would have his, what we would call the PD Desai Darbar in his
Yes.
court, because he would do mediation.
Yes.
At a time when mediation as a movement was still to gain ground. So looking at all these judges whom I came to respect, admire, quite apart from the fact that, I belong to a family of judges. But I must tell you that my father was not as sanguine as me about my accepting judgeship, because he perhaps knew that judgeship is a hard grind. Having been a judge from 1961 to 1985, my father knew that this was not an easy calling. It's a life which calls for relentless discipline.
Great sacrifice.
A sacrifice monetarily, of course, and a sacrifice in terms of your lifestyle as well. You lead a life of almost recluse.
Yes.
Away from your friends. You can't make new friends. You're away from society in that sense. You just can't go and attend any party. But for me, the ability to do something for the benefit of society was really the key, which led me to accept judgeship.
What is the period between the time you accepted judgeship and the time you were appointed? Was it a period of uncertainty?
I was asked to become a judge sometime in 1998.
Yes.
And my appointment was not coming through.
Yes, correct.
And it was over 2 years. I felt at some point of time, and there was a personal crisis at home as well. My late former wife was, she was undergoing treatment for cancer. And we didn't know whether to buy a new house, because, if we had to buy a new house, that meant we had to take a loan. If you took a loan, you wouldn't be able to pay the loan from the judge's salary. So one fine day, I decided I'm going to withdraw from the offer of judgeship. And, there's a little, even in times of darkness, and, there's always a moment to chuckle about. So I called Justice Bobde up, who is then not Justice, but Mr. Bobde, Sharad Bobde. And I told Sharad in the night, I said, tomorrow morning I'm going to go to, tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to go to Chief Justice Y.K. Sabarwal, and I'm going to withdraw my consent to becoming a judge. And he said that, hey, I was thinking of doing the same thing. So will you do me a favor? When you hand in your letter, please tell Chief Justice Sabarwal that Sharad Bobde is also withdrawing from his consent to become a judge. So I trooped into Chief Justice Sabarwal's office at about 5 o'clock in the evening. And one of my juniors came along with me just to sort of, make sure that I don't then have second thoughts, because my juniors were saying, don't become a judge. Dr. Birendra Saraf, Girish Kulkarni, who's now Justice Girish Kulkarni, Alpana Gone, they were all saying, don't become a judge. You have to be a lawyer. So they were, one of my juniors was standing guard as I went inside Chief Justice Sabarwal's chamber. So when I told him what I had come for, he said, look, we're not going to discuss it in the Chief Justice's chamber. You come to my home tomorrow, and come to my home tomorrow with your spouse. And then the next day, Chief Justice Sabarwal told me, he said, these are very important constitutional offices. You can't just change your mind, say yes, and then say no. But he says, I understand what the problem is. I explained to him what the problem was. I told him, look, it's not a question of money or, the difference in emoluments. It's this issue. My wife was with me. Rashmi was with me. And he says, give me 2 weeks. If in 2 weeks I don't have an answer for you, then you're free to go your own way. And within 2 weeks, he came back to me and said, your appointment is coming through, because I've explained to the Chief Justice of India that, you in any case, and possibly the second in the trio, which was appointed together,
Justice Khanwilkar,
you're going to likely to back out.
So I remember when you started as a judge, you sat till 6 o'clock in a division bench, though the court time was 5, and there's some very important judgments you delivered. Any of them would you like to share? Any experience as a judge? Any great judgment you delivered?
So, now talking about the cases which we did, yes, there was some great, jurisprudence which, came my way and which I was able to contribute to, But ultimately, Rafique Saib, the cases which leave a big imprint on your mind are cases which make a difference to either fundamental values such as the freedom of speech and expression, or for that matter, make a difference to the lives of individual citizens. Those sort of stay back. The complex cases which you decide, they will of course remain in the law reports.
Precedent book, yeah.
But it's these cases which sort of stay back in the mind. Just to tell you, I was a vacation judge in the summer of 2000. And I used to sit every evening till 8:39 at night in court as a single judge. And my steno would tell me that, you're not supposed to deliver judgments in vacation. You can just pass some small orders and, because he wanted to run home early. So one of those cases which I had was a case where a play had been banned.
Oh.
And the play was a play called Me Nathuram Godse Bolto Hai. And that came up to me around 6 o'clock or between 6 and 7 in the evening, the petition challenging the ban imposed by the Maharashtra government. And I closed my eyes and after hearing the parties, and I dictated a longish interim order staying the ban on the play. So at that evening, the play was staged, and then the book underlying document, the text was forfeited in exercise of the powers under section 95 and 96 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. And then I went to be a part of the three-judge bench, Chief Justice B.P. Singh, Justice Radhakrishnan and me. And I wrote the judgment in that case, setting aside the ban. I can give you an endless list of small cases or big cases, but there was one case which I have never forgotten. I was sitting as a single judge on the first floor. I think it was court number 21. The beauty of court number 21, the court just before Bhatt's canteen,
yes,
was that around 11:30, 12, you could have the aroma of all the Ukhala chai, which was, wafting into your courtroom. And you'd say, oh my gosh, look at these lawyers. They must be all having tea. I'm here stuck, working my day without being given the benefit of a tea break. Anyway, I had this dispute between a fairly well-to-do business family, in the city. And the brothers were at loggerheads. It was a dispute between the brothers. And through that day, I spent a lot of time getting them to understand that litigation would only destroy the family and its prosperity and business, and that settlement was really the way out. And eventually, about afternoon, we got a settlement in place. Now, that was not the end of the matter. After the dispute was settled, towards the latter part of the afternoon, I heard someone is singing in my court. Now, singing in the courtroom is, frowned upon. Just like a mobile phone going off in the courtroom is frowned upon. And can you imagine someone who's singing in the court? So I looked around my court and I said, who is this singing something in my court? A woman's voice. And then, someone gets up. He was a party in the litigation, which had just been settled. And he gets up and says, sir, please forgive my mother for singing in your court. So I said, but why is your mom singing? What is she saying? He says, we had been, the brothers had been fighting for the last so many years. And she's actually singing a devotional song to bless you, Judge. And what better sense of fulfillment can a judge have in life than to have someone who actually, an aged senior citizen sitting in your court, breaching supposed rules of etiquette in the courtroom, but giving you this blessing as a judge, thanking you for having resolved the matter. So these are the great satisfactions of making a difference to the lives of citizens.
What about your experiences in UP? That was I'm sure a different kind of experience. Such a large state, such a large court, and two benches, Lucknow and Allahabad.
Rafique Saab, when I was going to be appointed as a Chief Justice, I had a virtual Bharat Darshan, I would think, for the reason that sometime in the month of March of 2013, I got a call from a very senior colleague who had just been appointed to the Supreme Court and said, "Congratulations, Dhananjay. I believe that you have been cleared by the Collegium to be Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court." And then, nothing came out of it. Then I was told several months later that I was, slated to go to the Madhya Pradesh High Court as a Chief Justice, and nothing came out of that as well. And then one fine evening, this was probably in the month of August, Kalpana and I were driving down to a favorite restaurant of ours in Mumbai, which was O Calcutta. And, we had decided to have an evening dinner. And I get this call, as I was driving down Marine Drive from Justice R.M. Lodha. And he says, "Dhananjay, you've been cleared by the Collegium this evening to be Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court." And I was pretty shell-shocked because, in those days, Allahabad High Court had the reputation of being a very difficult court to handle. And I still remember Kalpana, and I whispered to Kalpana and said that, it looks like I've been cleared to go to the Allahabad High Court as a Chief Justice. And it was the most silent dinner we've ever had. We both ate our food in absolute abject silence, at what was to come. But surprisingly, when I went to Allahabad, the experience of that High Court was very different from what I had been forewarned. The bar was amazing. I never had a problem with the bar in the Allahabad High Court. Now, as you know, Allahabad is very complex because you have a bench at Lucknow. So the Chief Justice sits for a week in Lucknow and 3 weeks in Allahabad. Two very different stations, or headquarters, because Allahabad is a little more calm and quiet as a place. At least it was in those days, with little else apart from, the High Court and of course, the Army establishment and the Air Force establishment and the CAG office. Lucknow was, of course, buzzing with activity, the state capital. But, the seat of the High Court was at Allahabad, now Prayagraj, while Lucknow had a bench. Lucknow had the old Tehzeeb, the Ganga Yamuna Tehzeeb. And it had a very different Awadh culture, culture steeped in arts, in music, in shairi. But the bar at both Allahabad and Lucknow was very forthcoming. I was this, person, probably they had not seen too many people like me. I had some ideas driven to bring about change. There were times when, the bar would react. But I found overall that they were very receptive to any, suggestion for reform. I had my share of occasional strikes in Allahabad, not necessarily having to do with something I did. In fact, never was there a strike against me personally, but something else that had happened.
Some issue.
Some other issue. But I found that, the critical part about the bar is that once they realize that a Chief Justice is objective, that, he has no or she has no preferences based on caste or religion or gender or any other grouping. They accept you for what you are. At the end of an argument, if I just sort of indicated to a counsel in the Allahabad High Court that I had heard enough and I wanted to dictate the judgment, I would always dictate judgments on the spot. Even the full bench judgment, this was a habit which I cultivated from Mumbai, which was to dictate a judgment right after the argument was over. I think I reserved judgment in Mumbai not more than 3 or 4 cases in my whole tenure of 13 years. But including among the times when I sat with the Chief Justice, where you had to reserve judgment. But once you told the lawyers in Allahabad that I've heard you enough, and I'm now going to dictate the judgment, they always accepted it. The more senior among them would say, "Well, would you excuse me, allow me to go to a different court?" So the one thing which I really respect the Allahabad bar for was that they accepted any idea of modernization that I brought about. The entire building at Lucknow was constructed during my tenure So, the building, which was probably one of the finest buildings today for high courts in the country, came up during those 3 years that I spent in Allahabad and Lucknow. Mumbai is a city which is very cosmopolitan. It is buzzing with restaurants. You could go to an occasional. You had the United Services Club run by the
US Club,
the US Club, as we call it, which is run by the armed forces, by the Navy predominantly. There was, Allahabad was quieter. But having gone to Allahabad, I think one thing which I learned, Rafique Sahib, is there's so little that you need in life to be happy. And you can find happiness in very quiet surroundings.
Yes.
Being in UP gave me an opportunity to travel, the length and breadth of the state. And going there, I learned what the heartland of India is all about. I don't think that my education as a judge would have been complete if I had not gone to Uttar Pradesh. I learned a great deal about India, not just about the Hindi belt. I would speak to lawyers in Hindi, and I would joke at myself, seeking pardon for interspersing my Hindi with a few Marathi words.
Yes.
But they were very forthcoming. They loved the fact that there was someone who was trying to become a part of them. What lawyers, particularly in states, don't like when a Chief Justice comes from outside is someone who tries to impose a completely new system on them. If you work your way within the traditions of that High Court, understand what those traditions are, and then try and bring about incremental change, you find that the lawyers are very, very forthcoming. I got some great support from colleagues in the Allahabad High Court. Fantastic support from colleagues. Some of those colleagues I've worked with even in the Supreme Court. Justice Vikram Nath was one of my colleagues in the Allahabad High Court. If I had a problem and I just walked up to Vikram and said, "Hey Vikram, this is an issue which I need some intervention," and he would just say, "Forget about it, Chief, I'll handle it for you." I had several other colleagues who also rose to the occasion. Justice Manoj Mishra then became a judge of the Supreme Court with me. So we formed wonderful bonds with the colleagues in the Allahabad High Court. So it was truly a learning experience to spend those 3 years in Allahabad and Lucknow, something I haven't forgotten even now.
Now, coming to the Supreme Court, where ultimately you became the Chief Justice of India, what was your experience, and what are the cases you'd like to speak about? There were so many of them. I think you wrote the maximum judgments on constitutional law.
When I went to the Supreme Court, it was not a very easy transition.
Yes.
In the high courts, typically you do work of a particular genre. You have assignments. So, for instance, in Mumbai, if you did the tax assignment, you do just tax work for the next 3 months or 10 weeks. And that was again distributed into direct and indirect tax.
Correct.
In the Supreme Court, the real challenge was to find your rhythm in the cycle of work. Because in the Supreme Court, you do a wide diversity of work. Almost every judge does criminal work in the Supreme Court because that has the largest inflow. So, this diversity and the constant shuffling of, the intellectual challenges from case to case is something which you have to learn in the Supreme Court, and you have to set your own pattern of work. For Mondays and Fridays, you have to learn, you have to read 70, 80 cases. Come Tuesday, you've just finished your reading for Monday on Sunday. And again, Tuesdays, you have cases which come up after notice. Another 40 cases to read on Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, if you're in a constitution bench, you're doing CB cases, we used to call them. So this was the great challenge in the Supreme Court.
What about the right of privacy, which you decided in the Puthuswamy case? Puthuswamy was a judge in the Karnataka High Court.
Yes.
And he took up this cause.
Interestingly, the union government came to the Supreme Court with the plea that there is no right to privacy under the Indian Constitution. Because there was, in fact, a judgment, an early judgment of the Supreme Court which said that privacy is not a fundamental right. There was a passing observation. the issue arose in the context of the challenge to the Aadhaar legislation. So the first issue which was referred was whether privacy is a constitutional right, a fundamental right. That went to 9 judges because the earlier judgment was a judgment of 7 judges. So we were reconsidering a judgment which said that privacy is not a fundamental right. And writing that judgment was truly a challenge because we didn't have the facts of a particular case before us. The Aadhaar case was not being argued when we decided whether privacy was a fundamental right. So when crafting the judgment, and I wrote the lead judgment for a plurality of judges, 4 judges out of the 9, with other concurring opinions. There was no dissent there. The real challenge was first to decide whether privacy is a constitutional fundamental right, which is not a problem. I was very clear in my mind that privacy, though not expressly mentioned in the Constitution, is an emanation and intrinsic to human dignity, personal liberty, and the right to life. But then what all does privacy extend to? It, of course, extends to your own home. It extends to the most intimate parts of the home, like the bedroom. It also extends to public spaces. Privacy is not just about staying in your own home, but allowing yourselves to have a private life even in a public space in that sense. So there is this great thing about privacy. The next part was in today's technological age, how far does privacy go? So we also said that there's digital privacy. There has to be privacy in the digital world as well, data privacy, which then leads you to data security. So informational, privacy. So the judgment really explored a lot of vistas, which are only gradually now opening up. Privacy of every woman, bodily autonomy, bodily agency for every woman to make fundamental decisions on areas like reproductive choices. So that judgment, in that sense, I feel, opened up a whole new vista for the India which we now see unfolding gradually over a period of time. And I therefore feel that privacy, the judgment which laid down privacy to be a fundamental right, opened up a whole space in our jurisprudence.
So you had a very large canvas to write on when you were in the Supreme Court and made a great contribution to justice. What about the feeling that how society would view your judgment, the societal impact of the judgment? Was there a factor ever working on your mind?
Speaking for myself, I've never believed that a judge should shy away from taking a position merely based on how society will view that judgment. Because judgments speak to constitutional values, and they are fundamentally based on what the Constitution mandates.
Correct.
I don't therefore believe that a judge or a judgment should take a different position merely on the basis of a perceived view which any segment of society would have to that judgment. If you feel that that is morally or a constitutionally, more than morally, a constitutionally moral and a constitutionally valued option. You, of course, look at the impact of the judgment on society, on which way society would be led to evolve for the future on the basis of this judgment, which is very different from how constitutional judgments would be viewed by society. How they would be accepted or not accepted by society is one aspect. But the impact of the judgment on the evolving future is something obviously which the court has to bear in mind. And it's all about your vision as a judge on which way a just and humane society should be evolving for the future.
So now it's been a privilege speaking to you, but what is your message to young lawyers? And what is your message in this digital age? Where do you believe we should be heading?
Let me look at the second aspect first, and then finally a little bit of a message. The one thing which the digital age has done is to seriously question whether privacy exists.
Right.
I've been recently reading about, AI agents. We are now in the age of artificial intelligence. And India is a part of the movement. We are not standing aloof from the movement. It's said that there are about 700 million users of OpenAI's ChatGPT in India. So that's just one indicator of how much we are now part of, the global AI revolution that is taking place. But what AI agents really are doing, and AI agents, sort of coalesce software, iCloud, and basic IT infrastructure, is not just to collate data through the use of algorithms, but they try and access every element of our personal data, whether it's our emails, it could be your chats, it could be your credit cards, which means your credit history, your personal preferences. So today, what AI has the potent to do is to be able to analyze every aspect of our lives. Just not in terms of only the food which you order, but almost every aspect of your being, your health status, which is deduced on the basis of all the preferences which you make and the footprints which you leave in the electronic world by the choices which we are constantly making, by what we read, about what we hear, the music which you hear. Now, that leads us to the whole question as to whether privacy at all exists in or would exist in a world which is going to be dominated by AI. I personally don't have a cynical or a pessimistic view of this. I just feel that, our societies need to reorientate themselves. Greater transparency on the part of developers in disclosing the purposes for which our data would be used, not just general obfuscated statements on how the data would be used. We as, the purveyors of data, we are the source and origin of data as human beings. We should be very clear on what our data is going to be used for. So going forward, I think there's a great amount which lawyers have to contribute towards data regulation, because lawyers have this ability, to speak truth to power. That's one. Second, by our very training, lawyers are taught to question. Our profession is a profession where we are constantly told to question our opponents, question each other, question theorems, so to speak. And therefore, a new synthesis emerges in the legal profession. So law, I feel, has a very vital role to play, both in terms of allowing for innovation, because there is this balance. You have privacy and data security on the one hand, and you have the need for innovation on the other hand. So you can't really forsake one for the other. There has to be this golden mean between data privacy and security and the need for innovation, because let's make no bones about it. AI is going to lead us into unexplored areas like healthcare, or education. In areas where, healthcare is not easily accessible, particularly for people living in rural communities, or education. AI can completely transform access to education and healthcare. But equally, AI has this great danger of exposing everything of our personal lives for scrutiny. So I feel that, the legal profession, judges, lawyers, have a very vital role to play in the age in which we are now living and which we are now going to be moving towards, namely an age which is dominated by artificial intelligence. Your question on what I can say to
young lawyers.
But just, a few more years of experience and a little more gray hair, I think I can venture to say a few things. The first, I think, is that you need great professionals, whether it's on the lawyering side of the profession or on the judging side of the profession as we see it. You need top flight professionals who would be lawyers. You would need top flight lawyers who would become judges, because one side of the profession cannot exist without the other.
Correct.
One of the great problems which we are facing today is that lawyers are not accepting judgeship. And that is a cause for concern for the future. I don't think it's just a question of the fact that lawyers make much more money than judges who are dependent on their salary. There are many lawyers I know who are not just refusing judgeship for the lack of adequate emoluments, but the fact that we are now in an age where there's social media presence, everything that a judge does is scrutinized, judges are being trolled extensively in the media, without perhaps many people understanding the true nature of the role of a judge. But having said that, I think particularly for the young lawyers, it's important to understand how fulfilling a life in public law and public service can be. So at least some young lawyers must set their sights on rendering service to the community by assuming institutional roles in the legal profession. At the same time, for those who wouldn't want to become judges, because judging is not an easy task. I began, our interview by telling you it's a hard grind. And judging is not just deciding these, big ticket cases which make the headlines, but a life of judging, a life spent in judging, 25 years for me, is judging these small cases involving individual citizens' grievances, whether it was an Order 37 summary suit, whether it was a petition in those days for winding up, small issues which went to court. And, it's the daily routine of being a judge which can sometimes be backbreaking. So someone who wants to be a judge must have clarity that, you find despite all these routine tasks of drudgery, something which is fulfilling and which is of being of benefit to society at large in rendering justice to people. For those lawyers who don't want to become judges, there's a great future ahead there as well. For those lawyers who don't want to join the legal profession in terms of being court-oriented lawyers, there's a great future in transactional lawyering. In fact, my very dear friend Zia Modi once mentioned to me that she said, the sharpening of her skills as a transactional lawyer, and now is the head of one of the best law firms in the country, was through the skills which she acquired in the daily forensic contest at the bar. So, whether you're in the transactional space, whether you're in the space of being a court-oriented practitioner, or whether one is really becoming a judge, whether of the district judiciary or of the high court, I think each element of the system has a very vital role to play. Final word to young lawyers: please read diversely, travel diversely. In a city like Mumbai, one sign of affluence is you travel the world.
Yes.
I think there's more to learn from your own country. Going to the remote parts of the country, traveling across India, you realize what is truly the pulse of the nation.
Correct.
And it's important that, lawyers, particularly in a city like Mumbai, which is commercially such the capital of the nation, being a lawyer in Mumbai sometimes leads you into a cocoon where you're surrounded by, clients who are very well-to-do. You're dealing with commercial issues which confront a city like Mumbai. But in that process, perhaps missing the wider picture of what is emerging in the nation. So that's one thing which I would earnestly wish for lawyers in Mumbai to acquire, namely a vision of the life of the nation which lies beyond Mumbai. And that they can do through interpersonal contact, by being open-minded, by realizing that there's so much which you know and there's so much which you don't know. That the field of knowledge is far vaster than what any one human life can hope to understand. And when we have that sense of openness in our dealings with others, I think it enriches us personally. It also enriches our contribution to society and ability to change society. So that, if I may say, it's not really advice at all, but perhaps a little bit of the learning, experiential learning, which I have gathered over the years.
It's been a great privilege speaking to you. Wonderful to get back. And I'm sure there's a lot to learn from the little interview that we've had. Thank you very much.
Rafique Saab, speaking for myself, I learnt a great deal from your kind of discipline.
Thank you very much.
I would see you at the CCI, religiously doing your walks with Shehnaz.
Yes,
your own sense of discipline in the profession has been truly remarkable.